Welcome as we give you a summary of our Viking Grand European River Cruise that we took in 2023. The cruise was 15 days long and included visits to 4 countries: the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and Hungary. I will cover each of the stops in more detail in other videos, but this will be an overview. The Viking representatives were there to meet us as we arrived, and we were soon transported to our ship near the main train station in Amsterdam. We arrived at 9:30 in the morning on the day of our cruise, which I do not recommend as we were terribly jet-lagged, and as soon as we got there, we took off on a walking tour of the streets of Amsterdam.
Biggest coffee shop in the world.
Biggest coffee shop in the world.
Yes.
Okay, it's enormous.
Well, after visiting the biggest coffee shop in the world, which turned out also to be a marijuana dispensary, we had time enough to take a canal cruise, which I really recommend. You get to see much of the city from a canal barge. Now, when you're walking around the city, please be careful because there are bicycles everywhere, and it's very easy to get run over by a bicycle if you're not paying attention. After the walking cruise and canal tour, it was back to the ship to try and explore it a little bit and settle in before we recovered from our jet lag. The lounge was a really nice place with music and a few drinks, and we spent quite a bit of our time down here. We collapsed into bed for a very good night's sleep and then spent the night cruising from Amsterdam to Kinderdijk. And it was down a series of canals through Utrecht and finally ending up at Kinderdijk. We couldn't have asked for a better mooring place than this here at Kinderdijk, as we could just walk to the windmills. Kinderdijk is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it contains a network of windmills and other flood management devices. And we got to go actually inside some of the working windmills and get a tour of its mechanisms and living quarters. I should point out there were some other optional excursions where you could visit the windmills by bicycle or on a vintage barge or get a Dutch cheese-making session. Let me point out that I will have separate videos that go into great detail about each of these stops, so watch for those as we go on. This tour was in the morning, and then we returned to the ship for lunch, and then prepared to depart for our next destination. Now, when we signed up for the cruise, it was fairly late, and the only cabins were on the bottom deck, and you can see what kind of view we actually had. Once again, we cruised overnight, and it was somewhat disappointing because we didn't get to see much of the countryside as we cruised down the Wall River and intersected finally with the Rhine River and proceeded through Dusseldorf to the city of Köln, which is also Cologne, but the German pronunciation is Köln. Once again, we were docked in a perfect location, very near to the Cologne Cathedral, or the Kölner Dome, and we started with a walking tour that morning and had free time in the afternoon. Our walking tour highlighted the cathedral itself, but it was Sunday morning, so there were church services going on, being announced with these gorgeous bells at the top of the church, and we snuck inside in the back to just get a look at the services as they were in progress. After dodging a brief rainstorm, it was time for lunch, and we went to Peter's Brauhaus, which features what they call Kolsch beer, which is unique to Cologne. And we went there with some friends of ours from the cruise and settled down for a very nice lunch and, of course, a glass or two of beer. For lunch, the church services were over, so we returned to the cathedral, which is Germany's largest cathedral and, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There was actually an optional excursion that took you up to the roof of the cathedral, but we decided not to do that. After the cathedral, we returned back to the waterfront and boarded the ship for dinner. Actually, we were more interested in dessert, and they had some of the best carrot cake there. So after dinner, we set sail and went through the night from Cologne to Koblenz. Now, Koblenz is at the Deutsches Eck, or the German corner, which is where the Moselle flows into the Rhine River and is marked by this statue. The Moselle is a huge wine-growing region, and it is particularly well known for its Riesling wines. There were several shore excursions here, including taking the cable car across the Rhine River to the Ehrenbreitstein Fortress, or you could take a walking tour of historic Koblenz, but we opted to take the bus down to Marksburg Castle. Marksburg Castle is noteworthy because it was the only Rhine castle that was never destroyed, so it's preserved in perfect condition and gives you spectacular views of the Rhine River Valley. Note that the bus only goes partway up the hill, and it's a little bit of a hike up to the castle from the bus, and there are quite a few stairs in the castle as well, so you need to be aware of that. While we were touring the castle, our ship sailed from Koblenz down the Rhine to just below the castle, and we were able to board the ship right here. And then we started a daytime cruise, which was unusual, down the most scenic part of the Rhine River. This is considered the Rhine River Valley, with hills on either side of the river and spectacular views. Even though it was overcast, we got some great views of castles on either side of the river as we went down the river. Some castles were in better shape than others. Some had even been turned into hotels, and there were also quite a few wineries along the way, utilizing terraces on the very, very steep hillsides. Next, we sail past the Lorelei Rock, which has numerous myths about it, but supposedly there was a woman sitting on top of the rock combing her hair, luring sailors to their death in the rapids below. Once again, there are numerous wineries, and at the top of one is the Niederdenkmal, which celebrates victory in the Franco-Prussian War, and we exit the valley at Rudesheim. We continue to sail down the Rhine through the night, with our destination being Miltenberg, and we transition from the Rhine River to the Main River. The Main has numerous locks along the way, and this was the first of 35 locks that we transited on the way to Budapest. And here's a real quick time lapse of the lock filling up. There are no pumps. It's just exchanging water from one side to the other, and then the gates open, and off we go again. Midday, we stop in Miltenberg, and notice that everything on top of the ship is folded down, and that's so it will clear the bridges as we go under them in the canals. The quaint town of Miltenberg is known for its glass-blowing traditions, its half-timbered houses, and one of the oldest inns in Germany. There was also at the time a big festival going on, their version of Oktoberfest. Like the Oktoberfest in Munich, there was a carnival and a large beer tent. It doesn't look like a tent, but it was, constructed for this event only. Of course, we had to try a stein of beer. We left Miltenberg right after our stop and continued to sail through the night to Würzburg. As you can see, it isn't exactly a direct route, and we still had to go through numerous canals on the way. Once we reached Würzburg, there was an optional tour that would go down the romantic road to Rothenberg ob der Tauber. We opted to stay in Würzburg and take the included walking tour of Würzburg. Once again, notice that there are just tons of wineries around here. The highlight of Würzburg was our tour of the Bishop's Palace, which is one of the largest and most ornate palaces in Germany, and it's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was surrounded by lovely gardens, which made for a very nice walk. The inside of the palace is quite ornate, with frescoes painted by the famous Italian artist Tubalo and his son. The building was started in 1720 and finished in 1744. It's considered a masterwork of the Baroque Rococo neoclassical architecture, and it was heavily damaged by Allied bombing during World War II, and restoration has been in progress since 1945. Once again, we sailed through the night from Würzburg to Bamberg. As before, it was a long and winding road, but we slept through all of it. The included tour was a walking tour of downtown Bamberg, complete with its city hall sitting right in the middle of the river and decorated with beautiful frescoes. Bamberg is also known for its Rauchbier, which is smoked beer and is delicious. After the walking tour, we opted for the optional excursion, which was the Franconian countryside, and it began in the town of Zeil. There were some really great half-timbered houses in the town, and our guide regaled us with stories of witches and witchcraft. Our guide even demonstrated the spot by the city hall where the bad doers were punished with a chain around their neck. Just outside of Zeil, on the way to our next stop, we stopped at the Maria Limbach Church, a very small church situated on a cycling path and was the site of many pilgrimages. The ornate decorations on the inside of the church were quite surprising for a church so small. We continued with the bus to the other side of Bamberg to a town called Memmelsdorf. Here we stopped for a very nice lunch before continuing on to the Seehof Palace, which was the summer home of the Bamberg bishops. This was completed in the 1700s and was based on a hunting lodge from the 1500s used by the prince bishops. The outside had spectacular gardens. Inside, we visited the White Hall in the West Wing, and it had ceiling frescoes with allegories of hunting and other amusements in the bishop's residence. Once again, after dinner, we set sail for the overnight trip to Nuremberg. We docked fairly far out of town, so we boarded the bus and drove by the notorious Nazi sites, including Zeppelin Field. There was also an optional tour that took you to the Nuremberg courtroom where the famous Nuremberg trials were held. Likewise, you could take an underground tour of where they stored priceless art during World War II. We opted for the included walking tour of Nuremberg and started here in the main square, which is also well known for its Christmas market. We hiked up the hill to the castle, right near the Albrecht Dürer house. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go in, and that's the house right there. Unfortunately, it was raining and was one of the few days of rain we had during the entire 2-week trip. The views from the castle on the top of the hill were absolutely outstanding, and you may notice the trees are turning here, and this was from a video that I'd taken some time ago in the fall, but just to show you how great the city looks from up here. Well, then it was back down the hill to the main city and to this Gasthaus, which sat over the river, and we had an absolutely delightful lunch. We were supposed to board the ship to go from Nuremberg to Regensburg, but not so fast. Remember I had showed you where the top deck of the ship had everything folded down so it could go under bridges. In this case, it turns out the water was too high, and the ship would not fit under the bridges, even with the top folded down, so we had to take a bus and leave our ship behind in Nuremberg and transfer to another ship in Passau. So the next day, day 9, we boarded the bus in Passau and drove back to Regensburg. Fortunately, there was some really great scenery on the way, and once we arrived in Regensburg, we began a walking tour. We did get to see the Alte Wurstküche, the Old Sausage Kitchen, which is Germany's oldest restaurant, and you can get some nice bratwurst from there. There are also remnants of the Roman city here and the Goliath House. The bridge is from the 12th century, and you can also see St. Peter's Cathedral in the distance. You can also see the Danube River here, which we were unable to sail down, so it was back on the bus to Passau, where we had entertainment. Now, this young man was 14 years old and was here with his dad, who was playing the accordion. Well, we were already in Passau, so we started the day with a walking tour. Here we see St. Stephen's Cathedral, which contains Europe's largest pipe organ at 17,000 pipes. Unfortunately, it was under repair, so we didn't get to see it. Passau also lies on the confluence of 3 rivers, the Danube, the Inn, and the Ilz. Right near the Hotel Wildermann lies a beautiful glass-blowing museum. Also, it contains the bedchambers of Empress Elizabeth of Austria and Hungary, otherwise known as Sisi. You could take a bus up to the Bishop's Palace, where you could get really terrific views of the confluence of the Inn, the Ilz, and the Danube. When we returned to the ship, we discovered that dinner was laid out with traditional Bavarian food, and we also got a German lesson from the purser who spoke German. Mark Twain was not very fond of the German language, and he wrote an essay on it, and here's one of his quotes. After dinner, we set sail for Melk, Austria, again sailing overnight. Melk Abbey is a Benedictine monastery built in the 1700s after the original was destroyed by fire. It is well known for its old manuscripts and a huge library there. There was a second fire in the church itself in 1974, which led to its restoration up to 1995, and they used 6 pounds of gold bullion to put the gold leaf onto the statues. From the terrace of the Abbey, you get some really great views of the Danube River from here and looking forward to the Wachau Valley. This is one of the few times that we sailed during the day so that we could get a look at this beautiful Wachau Valley. Fortunately, the weather was much better than it was on the Rhine, and we got some great views of some castles again. A large number of vineyards and wineries along the valley. The valley is 36 kilometers long, and there are no bridges crossing the river. The only way to get across is by ferry. It is a very popular tourist destination for southern Austria. We arrive at Krems, which is at the end of the valley and is our destination for the day, but that evening we had a special treat. We are going to Vienna tomorrow, and we had some dancers come and show us Viennese waltz. So with that delightful show, we let the dancers off and then set sail for an overnight trip to Vienna, where we would stay for 2 days. We docked a little bit away from the city center, along with several other Viking ships. It looked like a big parking lot. Across the river was modern Vienna with some very fantastic skyscrapers. And then very near to our boat on the other side was the St. Francis of Assisi Cathedral. There were a number of tours offered for the 2 days. One is a panoramic tour of Vienna. There was a Klimt workshop, gold workshop in the Belvedere Palace, and you could go see behind the scenes at the Lipizzaner Stallions or go see a Mozart and Strauss concert. We have been to Vienna before, so we took a little walk down the Graben before we caught the guided tour to the Schönbrunn Palace. Schönbrunn Palace was a summer residence for the Empress Maria Theresia. So many workings of the Habsburg Empire were directed from here. Also extensive gardens that overlook the palace, and at the very back is the Glorietta. Since we were doing a lot on our own, we went to the Vienna State Opera that first night and saw Don Pasquale. This is Karlskirche, or St. Charles Church, and there's a lift inside that takes you up so you can get a close look at the frescoes on the ceiling. Behind the Albertina, which is a museum of modern art, there is the backside of the Hofburg, the Habsburg palaces, and you can get a good look at the Vienna woods in the distance, and also the Natural History Museum and the Art Museum. Fortunately, we were docked very near to the Prater, which is Vienna's amusement park and has a world-famous Ferris wheel called the Riesenrad. We wandered around a little bit, but were not brave enough to get on any of the rides. Sadly, we reached the last leg of our journey where we sail from Vienna to Budapest, and that was an overnight sail. Once we arrived in Budapest, we were treated with some great views of the famous Parliament building and of the river itself. Buda is the hilly portion on the left, and on the right is the flat part of Pest. At the top of Castle Hill is the Imperial Palace on the hilly side of Buda, and you can see how hilly it really is. The chain bridge connects Buda and Pest, and you can see the great big parking lot of Viking boats there. Close to the ship was the market hall where you could walk in and get just about anything of Hungarian cuisine that you could dream of. We also took a bus tour where we drove around the city, saw the Opera House, some unique architecture, and then went by Heroes Square, which is a collection of monuments and statues commemorating the Magyar state. The bus took us then over to Buda, where we went up the hill to the Matthias Church, which is named for the country's favorite medieval king. Of course, the views from up here are absolutely spectacular. Just as spectacular is the interior of the Matthias Church. As in Vienna, we took advantage of the opera and went to the State Opera House, where we saw Mozart's Magic Flute. The Opera House was built by the same architect as the one in Vienna, but it was stipulated when this was built that it had to be smaller than the one in Vienna, and it is truly a little gem. We conclude our little summary of this Viking Grand European Tour with some night shots down the Danube at the spectacular architecture and lights of the city. I do hope you enjoyed this tour, and if you would, please subscribe to our channel and leave any comments that you may have about this video.